This is my Hawken 50 caliber left-handed percussion cap rifle, and I wanted to do a tour of it as well as a breakdown of the rifle that I do for a comprehensive cleaning. I keep a piece of paper towel between the hammer here with some rem oil because they are dissimilar metals, and if you keep them touching each other, regardless of how you treat it, eventually they'll gouge and start to rust. So I always do this, and if you have something like this set up, you should too, and that'll stop that from happening. This rifle also comes with a double set trigger, which makes it somewhat more complex, but if I pull all the way back on the hammer, I left the paper towel in here to absorb the shock. The first trigger sets, and the second one is a hair trigger. You need only touch it very lightly to set it off. The rifle also includes a small patch box. Admittedly, I don't really use the patch box. I have no need for it. I'll go out into the field, but it would be helpful, I guess, if you were and need to store your patches somewhere. This doesn't require any cleaning either. It's not part of any takedown after the rifle is used. Another item worth mentioning is the ramrod. I don't use the ramrod that comes with the rifle. Again, I guess if you were in the field, it would be more convenient to use the ramrod that's stored with the rifle, be able to put it back. The risk of damaging the original ramrod is simply not worth it if you're doing bench shooting. I have a ramrod that has a brass guard at the end and a wooden handle, and I bring this with me to the range, and this ramrod is used instead of this one. This one actually only comes out of the gun during disassembly. The front sights are fixed. You can see here that the rear sights are adjustable, left, right, up, and down. I like these sights very much. Actually, it works well on this rifle. This rifle is extremely accurate and does quarter-size groups at 50 yards. For disassembly, you'll see that I'll use a set of fitted screwdrivers, which is extremely important, as well as this small mallet. And for this mallet, I would generally or only be using this nylon side of the mallet. And even then, I rarely have to use this at all. You'll see where it becomes applicable, though, like I said, in extreme rarity. Generally, you don't want to hit a rifle with things. I'll also need one more tool from the black powder box, and that is the chuck for the percussion cap. So first order of business is going to be the removal of the ramrod. It's just going to be taken out of the gun. If I were actually doing a cleaning, this would just be cleaned up and reinserted into the gun later when everything was finished as the last step. So I'm going to take that out now and put it to the side. The second order of business, I go in and I remove from the percussion cap. This means I have to pull the trigger all the way back. There's going to be no room to have the tool there. It comes off just like that. Put it in the tray. If you're wondering at this part why I'm not doing this on a gun that needs to be cleaned, it would be a mess. I would need to do this outside. I would have to have all my cleaning equipment. It's easier to do the complete breakdown of a rifle that's already cleaned just to discuss how I break this down to the lowest common denominator and not focus on having to clean it. That's what this video is about, the complete disassembly of this unit for one of my big cleaning events of this rifle. So next thing we're going to do is we're going to push this pin out. This pin is what holds the barrel to the stock, and it's going to come out from the other direction. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to flip it over so it's easier to see. Here we have the other side of the pin. On mine, depending on the weather and relative humidity, I can push it out if I push really hard and separate that pin, or I can use very gently, give it a couple of taps with this side. There you go. That's all it took just to get it started. At that point, I could probably give it a push. If I then take the rifle and flip it back over, there is enough started for me to start pulling back on the pin. I'll also point out that the pin is not flat, right? So there is an angle to it when it goes back in. That angle needs to be observed because the pin only goes back in one direction. We can see the arch. It's arching like an N, not a U. So at this point, the barrel is separated from the stock except for a hook that extends under here. So the barrel needs to be lifted up and out from the stock, and I will attempt to do that now on camera. So you can see it lift up. See it lifting up now and out. And there is the hook right there. And we can see where it recesses in. And at this point, we have complete separation of the barrel, right, from the rest of the rifle. Now we have two separate pieces to work with. So this barrel is already perfectly clean and oiled. There's nothing that obviously I'd be doing with it today except re-oiling it after assembly because I'm touching it, right? And we could see where the ramrod goes. We can see where the bottom or rear pin holds it in place and the hook in the back. You can see a lot of the bluing is missing here in this area from wear and cleaning where the percussion cap ignites. And this is quite normal over here. I see it a lot on my other percussion cap firearms too. And that's not visible when the rifle is assembled. And no cause for concern. Now, when I have this ready for cleaning, what I do is I generally have this in a bucket of a small pitcher of hot water and ballistol, and this sits, this hole sits in the bottom here. So when I have the cleaning connector on the other ramrod and it plunges up and down, it cleans and pushes water in and out of this. And that's how something like this would be cleaned and then dried, right? But there's no further breakdown of the barrel for the purposes of this video. So I'm going to move past the barrel now. I just wanted to discuss that briefly. First order of business, now that the barrel is separated from the stock, I'm going to relieve the pressure from the hammer because remember, it's still fully pulled back. So I'm going to pull back on the hammer all the way, pull the trigger forward, and release all of that pressure. Now it's safe to work on. And now we flip everything around because I'm a lefty. And what we have is two screws here that have to come out, as well as a screw here and a screw here. And remember, this is a comprehensive breakdown, so you're going to see why all of these screws need to be removed. It's going to become relevant. Another screw that we're going to remove is the one up here, up top, using only fitted flathead screwdriver. If you've got a set like this and you're not sure of the size, just take a size and size it up against the screw until you're confident that it seats well. It's not the right size. And once you have the right size, you can proceed. And it may be a different size for each individual screw. That one's perfect right there. So I know that's the one that I'm going to use to do this particular job. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to take the trigger guard off. It's just going to get it out of the way. As far as order of operations go, it's just a logical step. So being very careful, of course, because these are wood screws going into wood. You just want to get them out. You don't want to do any damage by doing these things. When you put them back, you don't want to torque them down and destroy the wood. You're going to have to end up doing wood repair. No one needs that. You'll immediately notice on the trigger that the rear has one screw and the front has a screw thread, and that is because this trigger assembly front screw is held in by this top screw. So that is a good thing to know. So that one and that one holds in the trigger assembly here, and the side plate which holds this hammer is held in by these two screws. So I remove this back screw now. Flip the gun over. Change out my bit for the appropriate bit. To remove the top screw. And with that, the assembly falls right out from the bottom, right here. I'll place this off to the side for now. Push the screw up so I can remove it from the unit. Now I turn it on its side and remove the 2 remaining screws. And flip it back over. Note that the front screw also holds in this spring that provides resistance for the ramrod that comes with the gun. So when you pull that screw out, this spring will come out as well. It'll need to be reinstalled later. At this point, this entire plate can be removed by gently rocking it, very gently. Rocking it just to loosen it from the wood, and out it comes. And now we could take this and put it down. At that point, this stock is completely stripped. It can be cleaned in areas that require cleaning and maintenance. Metal areas right here, even areas in the wood that there may be accumulation of black powder. Though I wouldn't be too worried about cosmetic stuff that'll never be seen. You know, an inspection can be done on certain areas. But this is as far as you can go, or as far as you should go. There would be no good reason to ever try and remove this piece. Not at all. So don't touch that. But this is it. This is it. This is the stock. This is the butt plate, the patch box. I will point out quickly, though, that if you need to polish any brass or machine any sand castings or imperfections out of the brass, you've never had an opportunity, there's no better time to do that. At that point already, it might be a rare occasion to remove these brass pieces to do that. So if you really wanted to get involved, if some inletting required or whatnot, that's going beyond the scope of this. But there is obviously an exposure to some brass. You can see this right here. It could probably benefit from complete removal. This particular piece, and I'll zoom in. You can see that this is more of an unfinished lacquered brass piece, where I have polished this particular brass piece is much more shiny. That again applies to the butt plate, which was cleaned up and polished a bit, nothing crazy, but the patch box is more of a rough sanded patch box. Another note worth pointing out for the brass, and I did spend a good deal of time on this, is the trigger guard. With the trigger guard removed, it's a great time to clean and polish this brass to take out any machine marks that may have been left from the factory. So here's the hammer pulled out of the rifle. This is not what it would look like coming back from the range. This is obviously clean and shiny. This would be covered in a powder, not terribly, mind you. This is sort of sealed, but it does get in over time. And I'm not going to tell you that every time I come back from the range I go and do this, but this is serviced when every couple of times to ensure that I start with a baseline. I'm not letting it get all caked up. There is only one adjustment in here. You can see a screw down there. I'm not exactly sure, not an aficionado of this particular type, so I'm just going to say that there is an adjustment screw down there, but there's only one, and we can see this is full forward, and this is at the half position, and we can see it's at the full position, and I'm just going to hold it and release it back forward. And you can see the amount of tension that's put on this main spring here when 1, 2, which is definitely a case for not storing these with the hammer back, either at the full or half position. I wouldn't imagine a lot of people would, but I definitely would not. Here's the next piece I find equally as interesting. This is the double set trigger. There's a lot of adjustments on here. We can see several screws. We see 1, 2, looks like 3. I think there's a fourth adjustment somewhere. But if I pull back on the first one, we can see that it locked. And if I pull the second one, we can see just a little click, it fired. So this one took a lot of force in this one. Just a little touch. I guess it's somewhat hard to appreciate when it's not inside the gun, but we can see how they sort of interact with one another. And there's also a case to be made that you don't need to pull the back trigger. You could use the front trigger without the back trigger. That is to say that if you chose to just use one trigger, you could just use the front trigger exclusively, but it would be a much tougher pull. There would be more weight to be applied to set off the gun than if you would have set it first with the back trigger. So it is a possibility. It's something I would never do, but it is a possibility. And with that, I believe it's time to reassemble. We start with seating this in very gently. Remember, you don't want to put it in on an angle and damage the ends of the wood on the perimeter. So everything has to be seated flush. Take your time when you do this. You can see everything's seated nicely. I could carefully turn it over, ensuring that it doesn't pop out, and put in only the back screw first, right? Remember, the front screw is going to require some more attention because the front screw will be holding the spring that's used to hold the ramrod into place. So we'll start with the back screw. And then we'll do the front screw. Also remember to keep the screwdriver centered. You don't want to mar any of the metal around it. Also making sure that the head of the screwdriver is smaller than the screw that you're working with, or the same size of the screw that you're working with. It's a good idea too. Right? So this is back in place. The spring is back in place. Now the first step is completed. And remember, these screws are going into wood, or the compressing wood together. They should be snug. They should not be, 50 pounds of pressure. The point is not to crack the gun. The point is simply to secure and snug them. Our next order of business will be the trigger. We're going to place the trigger back into position. We'll take a look down there. Make sure everything clears. Everything should seat just fine as long as everything is forward and there's no slack on either of the triggers and the hammers all the way in the forward position. Everything is nice and loose, should fall right into place as so. We'll loosely fit our first screw in on the bottom, just enough to take the slack out so the mechanism doesn't fall down, and that's just good enough to be able to turn the unit back over and be able to drop in the machine screw on top. Then we will have to again change our screwdriver head to the appropriate size. This one we tighten down, snug it. That's good enough. And now we can flip it back over and snug the other side. Again, switching the screwdriver head. This should be the last time we switch it. And it's finished. Now we'll reinstall the brass and put that back on into position, pressing down gently on both sides so it seats properly. And then we'll put our wood screws back in, being mindful not to over tighten. Now we can test out the mechanism. Looking good. Now we can proceed. Some of the areas that I'm going to no longer have exposure to in the next step, I am pre-applying some rem oil to, because I've been touching it throughout this video so it doesn't rust. So that's just the back and lower portions of the rifle. I'm just doing that really quickly. Now I'll pull the hammer all the way back, place the barrel in position, and center it, ensuring that it's perfectly centered before the next step. And you have to feel for resistance. You don't want to break anything. So go back and forth till you find the right spot and lower the whole thing into position as such. And now it is fully seated. Everything feels good. We can proceed. It's not balanced, so I have to move it back a little. But there we go, back in position. Now I'll put the pin back in the rifle, remembering it's shaped like an N, not a U. So it curves downward. There it is. Nice tight fit. It's not going to move. The next step is screwing in the percussion cable, and I'll tell you right now, it's like the most important rule, although they can be a pain to put back on, depending on the quality of the thread of the nail. These are fine though. Always, always, always hand turn these things on. You will never, ever, ever use the wrench to put these on. You can use the wrench, the tool, to give it a little tighten afterwards, like I'm about to do, right? I got it on, and then I just go like that, and I'm done. But never ever turn them on with this tool, because the risk of cross-threading is simply not worth it. Now that it's on, I pull the trigger back, lock it forward. So now I take the ramrod, reintroduce it. You can feel it lock in the spring. We know the spring was reinstalled correctly. And finally, as I had mentioned, I take a small piece of paper towel, soak it in rem oil, fold it over on itself one more time. Lift up the hammer and drop it back down on there. This rifle is complete. It has been completely stripped all the way down and reassembled back together, which would have been done for the purposes of cleaning this rifle. So that's it. That's the complete stripping and reassembly of my left-handed 50 caliber Hawken rifle. I hope this was helpful to Hawken owners out there. Thanks for watching.